You know, if you pull up a map of the world today, it's kind of surprising to see that Britain still holds sway over 14 different overseas territories. Places like Gibraltar, the Falkland Islands, they're really the last little pieces of what was once this absolutely staggering global empire. Right, so that's the big question we're tackling. How on earth did that happen? How did a relatively small island nation come to dominate the entire globe? Well, it's a story packed with incredible ambition, some really catastrophic failures, and of course, world-changing victories. And just to give you a sense of the scale we're talking about, look at this number. At its absolute peak, the British Empire covered a quarter of the world's land, a full 25%. It ruled over almost a third of the entire global population. It was, and this is no exaggeration, the empire on which the sun truly never set.
Okay, so to really get this, we've got to go back in time, back to before Great Britain was even a thing. See, the groundwork for the empire was actually laid by the Kingdom of England, which was the big power in the British Isles. Meanwhile, its northern neighbor, Scotland, was still fiercely independent.
Now, those first steps toward an empire, they were shaky, to say the least. Under Queen Elizabeth I, the early attempts at colonization were, well, a bit of a mess. The famous first colony at Roanoke just vanished. But then a really powerful new idea took hold: private joint stock companies. You can basically think of these as the world's first big corporations. Companies like the East India Company got these royal charters, which gave them a total monopoly on trade in huge parts of the world. And they became the real engines of expansion. What's really interesting is that there wasn't just one way to do this. They didn't have a single blueprint for a colony. As you can see here, they kind of fell into three main categories. You had your crown colonies, which were ruled directly by the king or queen. Then you had charter colonies, run by those big companies we just talked about. They often had a lot more freedom. And finally, proprietary colonies, which were basically just for-profit business ventures. So while England is expanding, Scotland is watching, probably pretty enviously, and decides to get in on the action with its own massive colonial project, the Darien Scheme. The plan was super ambitious: set up a trading colony in Panama. To get the money, the Scottish public invested a huge amount of cash. We're talking nearly a fifth of the entire country's wealth. And the result? An absolute, unmitigated disaster. The colony was just wiped out by disease, starvation, and attacks from the Spanish. That failure completely bankrupted Scotland. The country was plunged into this devastating financial crisis. For a lot of Scots, the only way out was to formally unite with their much wealthier southern neighbor and, get a piece of England's growing colonial pie. So in 1707, the Acts of Union were passed, and the single kingdom of Great Britain was born. The stage was finally set for something much, much bigger. And with the combined might of England and Scotland, this new kingdom of Great Britain was primed for some serious overseas expansion. This is the moment the empire really starts its climb to becoming the undisputed top dog on the world stage. And boy, was that climb fast. Just look at this timeline. Throughout the 18th century, Britain just kept racking up win after win against its rivals in Europe. It grabbed territories like Newfoundland from the French and Gibraltar from the Spanish. Over in India, the East India Company won the Battle of Plassey, which cemented its control in Bengal. And then the capture of Quebec pretty much kicked France out of North America for good. But all this rapid growth created a brand new problem. You see, Britain saw its American colonies as its sovereign territory, plain and simple. But it didn't give the people living there the same rights as people back in Britain. So when Parliament started levying taxes on them without any of their say or representation, well, the colonists saw it as a massive betrayal. The American Revolution and the loss of those 13 colonies in 1783 was a huge shock. It was the empire's first major defeat, but here's the thing. It didn't stop it, not at all. Instead, it just triggered this massive strategic pivot. With America gone, Britain turned its full attention and resources towards Asia, the Pacific, and Africa. And that pivot brings us to the period between 1815 and 1914. Historians often call this Britain's imperial century. After Napoleon was finally defeated, Britain was pretty much left as the world's only superpower. This is when the empire reached its absolute peak of power and influence. So how did they pull it off? How did they maintain that level of dominance? Well, it all rested on these two pillars that fed into each other. First, total naval supremacy. The Royal Navy's massive victory at Trafalgar gave it complete control of the oceans for over 100 years. And second, a giant global trade network.
The Navy protected the shipping lanes, and the incredible wealth that Britain made from taxing all that trade, well, that paid for the Navy. It was a perfect, self-sustaining loop of power.
And of all the empire's possessions, none was more valuable than India. After a major rebellion in 1857, the British government got rid of the East India Company and took direct control itself. India became the economic engine of the empire, a source of unbelievable wealth and manpower, earning it that famous nickname, the jewel in the crown. At the very same time, Britain was locked in this frantic race with other European powers to carve up Africa. It occupied Egypt to get control of the super-important Suez Canal, it fought and defeated the Boer republics in South Africa, and it claimed huge chunks of the continent. They even had this grand ambition of building a railway line that would stretch all the way from the Cape in the south to Cairo in the north. But here's the irony. Even as the empire was reaching its largest physical size in the early 20th century, the seeds of its own destruction were already being sown. The imperial century was coming to a close, and the beginning of the end was already in sight. The final, fatal blows came from the two world wars. I mean, think about it. Britain was on the winning side both times, but the conflicts left it totally bankrupt. It had to lean heavily on over 2.5 million troops from its colonies just to fight the wars. By the time it was all over, Britain just didn't have the money or the political will to hold on to its massive, overstretched global empire anymore. And what came next was this period famously called the Wind of Change. Britain was weak from the wars, and nationalist movements for independence were rising up all over the empire. So, one by one, Britain began to grant independence to its colonies. All through the 40s, 50s, and 60s, the world map was literally being redrawn as dozens of new countries emerged from the shadow of the empire. But the end of the empire didn't mean a total severing of ties. Actually, most of the newly independent countries chose not to cut all connections with Britain. Instead, they joined the Commonwealth. It's a totally voluntary political association that's basically the successor to the empire, linking all these nations together through shared history and values. So after almost 400 years, the empire was pretty much gone, but its impact on the world, that was permanent. Let's wrap up by taking a look at the really complex and long-lasting legacy it left behind. And that legacy is everywhere you look. It's in those 14 overseas territories that still exist. It's in the fact that the English language is spoken all over the planet. It's in the Commonwealth, which still connects all those former colonies. Modern, multicultural Britain itself is a direct result of this imperial history. And for a lot of people, the final symbolic end of the whole story came in 1997, with the handover of Hong Kong back to China. Which brings us to this final big question. After all of it, all the influence, all the power, the connections it built, and the conflicts it started, what is the true legacy of an empire that, for better and for worse, really did shape so much of the world we all live in today?